see any time set aside for, what are the goals to have accomplished at the end of the staff meetings? What's the practical takeaway? If we just discuss it the whole time and there's nothing to take, then we're not accomplishing as much. Because what you have for Wednesday morning is other topics, not the multi-ethnicity topic. So do we have certain goals or things we want to take away from this?
Well, sure. So the applications would be built into the various sessions as part of, what are the next steps to instantiate this, to make this real in our spheres, our spheres of influence. So I think they're just part of each session. When we talk about indirect, there'll be some self-awareness things, there'll be some journaling exercises, there'll be some action steps about how this could play out, or how do you see this direct, indirect communication influencing your own work? What might you do to take steps to improve that? Those kinds of things, I think, are going to necessarily be built into sessions. I think on the larger view that we're hoping that this provides a pilot session for the staff conference in 2018 that we're doing around the same theme, and whether or not these kinds of sessions are useful or not, and that sort of thing. So that's a wider goal as well here. Chloe, I think you had your hand up, and then we'll go with Katie, and then Heidi.
Yeah, one of my comments was pretty much the same thing as Brian, that just want to see, I feel like why we're doing this is because we want to do things differently. So I just want to make sure at the end that ISM is starting at least to do things differently, so that it's very pragmatic and integrated into everything that we're doing. But then also it's not clear to me how much of the time is interactive. It's not quite the right word, but how much is just flat out training and how much is interactive. And I see the social times that are set aside, but just wondering the nature of the training.
Well, I think it's a big accent on interaction in most of it, Chloe. I think there'll be substance there in each session that we've tried to include, so that people are responding to something and not just, well, what do you all think about this? But, some structure to guide that. And when we get into the MLED sessions on Tuesday, there's material that gets presented, but it is interactive. So it's participatory. So I may not be answering your question, but I think it's probably more interactive than instructional.
Okay, that's helpful.
I forget, Katie, you're next, I think, and then Heidi. Unmute yourself, Katie, or I will. Okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead, Katie.
Thinking about the thing I got, task-oriented versus relationship-oriented, seeing as there's going to be people there who've never met each other before, I feel uncomfortable that the first evening, I understand why to do it in small groups, but I just feel like we need something at the beginning to get to know one another, because there will be people there that we've never met before. And the next day we're going to be interacting on some things that are pretty heavy. And to me, it would feel better to do a little bit more relational stuff at the beginning.
Okay.
Who is new to the team, Mark?
Well, we're inviting, part of the issue is that the MLED training works a lot better if you have more equal parity in diversity of people who are there. So we've invited Emmanuel and Bonnie. So Allison and Emmanuel are coming together, a married couple who met at Staff Conference 15 and got married, and now we're in Virginia. He's not on university staff, but is seriously considering it. And as a Cameroonian, and is just to get a feeling for ISM and coming with Allison, it seemed like a good idea to invite him. So he's coming. We're hopeful that Darlene Jackson is she in North or South Carolina?
South.
South Carolina. I've invited her, but I haven't. And reminded her, but I haven't heard back from her yet about whether or not she's able to join us.
I'll try to find out. But
Okay. And then Tony Warner, who's always formerly been a part of our team, I'm encouraging to come this time around to see if he might be able to join us as well. So those are the new people that we've considered at this point. Okay, Heidi?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. I'll start as a tie-in with what we just discussed. So I'm getting a little confused here with all the layers, because it says ISM National Team Meetings. It feels more like ISM National Team Training. And you say there's a lot of interaction, so fair enough, but it's interaction around issues. I got the sense, I wasn't there last year, but I got the sense that one of the weaknesses last year was that we had a lot of interactions around issues, but not enough interaction around people. So that may reflect against a need that's not met. The surrounding layer of that is how will we address the reconfiguration of the national team? So relationship building, what priority are we going to give that for this particular team? Because if this particular ISM national team, if we think that this will continue to meet once a year, then it's worthwhile investing into relationships. If we say we will disband this ISM national team meeting setting, then we could prioritize more on the training. Does that make sense? So where do we need to and want to invest? If this ISM national team that meets in February is a standing entity, that will continue to be a standing entity, then I think we might be well advised to invest more into relational time. Along with that, on the first night, I know with 15 people to all share our stories, that's going to take us 150 minutes if everybody takes 10 minutes. At the same time, I wonder whether that might not be central to really hear everybody's story. Because I want to build trust with other people so that we can really interact with others the next day and not hold back. Secondly, it's so important that I really listen to the different journeys, not just of my minority brothers and sisters, but even the experiences of my non-minority brothers and sisters, because I may learn that they had either no experiences or very deep experiences beyond what they should have as a white person. So to me, it would be a very high value to really listen to everybody. So then I could enter the second day not walking on eggshells, because I'm afraid I say something that may be misunderstood. I say something that people misconstrue because they don't know my backstory. And then, so I'm just looking for more relational time. And finally, we have worship for 30 minutes in the morning. Yeah, I want to see more worship. I want to see prayer. I think it's such a potentially painful topic. We can disengage from it and attack it mentally and pedagogically and do well with that. But I wonder, and I say this as a high T, I say this as a person who lives in our head, to really affect change within me, I think I must enter it with my heart, which is very treacherous water. And I can only do that with close relationship and trust with others and with lots of prayer. So those are just some responses, and I'm not sure that I have an answer to that, but just some sense that I get as I look at this. It's a great training. It's a great intellectual training. I'm missing a little bit the personal and God time there so that it would affect my heart.
Well, yeah, there's a little bit of a dichotomy there I'm not sure I agree with. But what are some of the other things that some of the others of you think about that in terms of the goals, like how much of a team and how realistic is it to foster that kind of intimacy given how often we meet or how seldom we meet? And Heidi's other concerns or issues there about the worship time and around the relational time that we have.
I'll say for me, I feel very new to you guys and more of the rest of the group. I wasn't there in Portland, and I would really love the hearing stories time from everybody, but it is impossible in one night. But I would gladly opt to have that after dinner out the first night or something like that. I'd change the plan if we had to, and have a relaxed environment where people could share more of their journey. I'd be willing to do that. I like to relax, I like to play, but I'd be willing to do that if it took the first night and even the second night or something, if that was what it took to be able to give time to everybody to share.
Okay.
Or changing the content in the daytime.
Okay. Other thoughts?
The difficult thing about story sharing is that, like, if you don't give people enough time, it's really hard to get it's almost, I wouldn't say pointless, but I feel like you're not really sharing a story if you have like 10 minutes or something, where it's like you're just giving a brief outline of something. And I think Heidi's point too of just building trust with so many new people and such a large group of people. I just kind of wonder where people are at and how open people will be in sharing their stories, and what it'll take to get people to be ready to share more openly. And then I think also, like, the first year, Mark, when you let us, we did some good story sharing about our lives, and it was spread out throughout the whole entire time of meetings. And what was also hard about, I mean, it was good, but what was hard was I felt like towards, as you progress, like the very beginning, the first 2 or so people was really hard because they had to break the ice. And then you get in the middle, that was really good. And then towards the end, like, it was just like people were storied out, I felt like, like, so there was like a climax, it was good right in the middle, but the beginning and the end were rough. And so it's just really hard to get, I just don't know quite how to do it with such a large group of people in such a short time with new people involved, where it would be quality, like really quality sharing. So I'm not providing a solution. I'm just kind of questioning, trying to figure out.
Okay.
I also was thinking of those meetings a couple of years ago, because I know for me, it felt like the only thing we did at those meetings was people shared their stories. I know there had to be something else we did. I even know Darren was there, but like, I don't remember a thing about like what actually the outcomes were of those meetings. All I remember was sitting in the room and listening to people's stories. And I can only remember maybe 1 or 2 pieces of everyone's story, because there were just so many stories, like 15 or 16 people spending an hour sharing their story. It takes a while. And there's also just to give an alternative viewpoint. I am not the type of person who builds trust or builds relationships with people by sitting and sharing stories. I do that by interacting and doing a task. And so just to know that there are other viewpoints. So for me, working together on a task is going to build far more relationship with other people than sitting and talking. Just so.
Thanks, Sharon. Other thoughts? Does anybody like any of this? It's just a disaster from
We don't have time to say all the things we like about it, Mark. My only comment on the stories kind of thing is that I think it depends on if trust is one of our big issues or not, and the nature of that. if trust within this team, is the primary issue or not. And if it is, then sharing stories could, may need to be elevated. But if it's not what's broken per se, might be able to do the small group kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think, yeah.
Comment, I was just going to say, finding a little bit of time for a concert of prayer where it's a little more extended could be helpful.
Yeah, please don't hear me to say that, we don't trust each other, but I think trust is a little bit of a meaningless word unless I know people, right? I mean, again, I wasn't there last year and I don't want to assume. From what I gathered, and I may be wrong, so really what I'm sharing, I hold in an open hand. The impression I got was that people felt that they just gathered around tasks and worked on tasks, and it was very effective, and there was great outcome at the end. But what they missed was the meeting and the being with each other in addition to working each other. And I think, so in my mind, it's not a trust question. It's a matter of relational growing together. So the content is great, but to me, again, it feels like a training. And if we think that's what it takes for us, then by all means, it's great training. If we think there's something else, then we may have to reshuffle that a little bit. The other question I had is how much, and maybe it's there and I don't see it, but if we think that this is preparing us in some way or tying in with what we want to do for the ISM National Conference in 2018, I would really like to see a piece here, and maybe that's what happens on the last day in the morning, where the ISM national team feels that there is input and there is a degree of shaping and anticipating and deciding about the topic. So that we don't just say, oh, it's all kind of decided already. Last year, we sensed we had this issue in the ISM national team, plus we really don't have enough, IQ or EQ or whatever, and we want to see more of this, and so we decided to do this. I think it's a high value in our team, and I would help maybe the relationships and the trust and the self-understanding of what the national team is and does to create a space in February to talk about the staff conference.
That's good, thanks.
Can I just say something about storytelling?
Maybe interrupt just a second, Eva, just to give Darren and Michael a chance to say something who haven't said anything yet about this, and then we can keep going.
Sorry, I had a thought and then I lost it when I started thinking about what other people were saying.
Need to get that.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I was thinking is, we as a team chose multi-ethnicity as our topic, and we chose it because we felt like we needed to grow in it. So as far as this being heavy on training, I think that makes sense to me. I think we as a team identified it as a place where we need to learn and grow in. Yeah, and having done some ME training on the GFM end of things, I think the sharing of our ethnic journey, like that type of storytelling, is really important to it. I'm not sure if I have a strong opinion about how we structure the way in which everyone thinks through those things. And the last thing I would say is, I think in terms of building trust and getting to know one another, again, in GFM team meetings that I've been a part of, one of the ways we've achieved that has been just by front loading the meeting, by rather than sharing our stories, sharing questions we want others to ask us over the course of the meetings, over meal times and breaks. And that kind of gave some like pseudo structures to those times, that it didn't feel forced, but it also led to some more deep conversations than what maybe would have happened otherwise.
Just to clarify, Michael, your last point there, so was that like just an MC person who said that, like, think up the questions you want to ask, and were they shared through the whole group, or how were they shared with others?
Yeah, it was just in the very first session, whoever was facilitating at that point we went around the circle, introduced ourselves, and then said, here's, I think, 2 or 3 questions maybe that I would love for you to ask me over the course of our meetings together.
And how many people were in the circle? Was it everybody, or was it a small group?
It was the GFMLT and the Focus Ministries leadership team, which was probably 15 people.
Okay. Okay. All right. Interesting suggestion. Okay. Thank you, Michael. Darren, do you have something you want to add?
I kind of said it earlier, but maybe I'll make it more personal. I think if we do sharing, I want everybody to get a chance to speak. I want to hear from everybody. And I amen what Eva said. If it ends up being too compressed, it just feels like we have to give a couple bullet point summaries to stuff that's best told with more time, but also best told from the heart, you know? And so I'm conscious of that. I kind of like the idea Mike said about having people share on meals and stuff. I think I'll just say personally, I realize I might be in the minority in this because I'm the newbie here more than anybody else. But I think as I'm trying to relearn America and ISM for the first time and Ivy again, I just often feel like, what the heck's going on? And I'm not sure, like, the thing I'm feeling or wanting is the same as everyone else. And so I feel like the odd man out. And so, and I felt a lot of times on staff and overseas and stuff, like I was thought to be, he's right in step with everybody. He's a strong-looking white male. Surely he's in touch. And I've been like, I have no clue what's going on, or I feel very different in this group or something like that. So if we're going to share, I'd love that, the chance to engage personally and get to know people. Otherwise, if it's not a felt need in the team, I understand that because I might be the newer person. But I'll need that, or at least I'll say to you guys, don't assume I'm in touch, like tracking with everything. This is still a whole new world for me. So even to see my name in there to lead something, I'm like, oh, really? I don't even know what these sessions look like in this kind of conference. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a period at the end of that statement / questions. They're just an ellipsis.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Did everybody get a chance to at least say one thing, right? I sort of remember. Okay, Eva, go ahead. I cut you off before. Unmute yourself, Eva.
Sorry. I was just going to say, the hard thing is that I feel like story sharing is important and helpful for me in the past, especially around multi-ethnicity. But that's more been, I guess, for me in smaller group settings and they were also done in different ways where wasn't so compressed in a very short time frame. And I mean, even think of our team, national teams meeting since like 2004 or something, crazy long time ago. And I feel like it took us a really long time, for those of you like Katie and Heidi, you've been around, for a while. It did take a while for us to build trust and get our stories and get to know each other, and so because we have a new team and a bigger team, I just feel like realistically it is going to take time to build that kind of trust and to get to share a story over a period of time, both in formal and informal settings. It wasn't just like, at least for me, it's not like, boom, here's your little slot and get it out there. But, and one of the challenges of having we don't have those natural interactions as with local teams. So I guess, like, to add on to what others have said is, are there ways to bring in more components of sharing lives? I mean, it's hard when we're not all together in the same geographical region, but that will, just things that we could do to kind of outside of that 48 hours or whatnot to continue conversations and story sharing and relationship building.
I think it highlights, Eva, a bit of a, I don't know, dilemma is quite the right word, just a situation that teams should operate at the level, we're all part of multiple teams. And so you have to kind of right size your expectations and the way that you interact together based on the nature of that team's thing. So, for instance, there are many of the people who'll be at this team meeting for whom, they're already on local teams, right? So regional coordinators are, and they're seeing those people much, much more often than they do the national team. And we get together on these team calls, and we get together once a year. Now we have unity in terms of the kinds of things that we're trying to accomplish, and all. But the idea that we would be like this 15-person team would be the primary community within InterVarsity for the 15 people who are there is a big assumption. It's not because I wouldn't love that. I kind of would be first in line in some ways. But honestly, I think we would have to meet a lot more often than we do to foster that kind of trust. So right-sizing our expectations is important to me. Now, I'm saying that out of my cultural and temperamental biases, right, as we all do. And we've seen it on this call already. Some of us feel like, oh, we need more relationships. Some are like, well, that's not the way I do it. And those are all valid. But at the end of the day, we have to make decisions about how we're going to do that. And what I think I've heard is that storytelling is important, that we don't want to have it so compressed that it just becomes bullet point sharing, which doesn't foster much trust. It more fosters knowledge of one another and some things that could be pursued later. But that it seems more like the accent I'm hearing from you all is that, yes, stories are important. Yes, it's important to take significant time when we're together to do that. And we need to be realistic about what expectations are there for us. So it strikes me that my inkling or leaning still would be, it feels to me like storytelling in smaller groups, rather than trying to do it with 15 folks, that our expectations and are right-sized that way, as we often do when I get together at the national team meetings, and we meet in small groups that are good with 4 or 5 of us, and a team meeting of 50 people where we get training. So in that sense, at least, it seems like it is the kind of compromise, or if that's the right phrase, that it could address both. What I'm hearing is that if we really want all 15 people or 16 or 17 to share, we pretty much have to wipe out that second day, just wipe clean the second day, at least through the afternoon, to give that kind of storytelling, this sort of non-compression. That feels like a huge commitment of the time we share together, and would move us toward being a more intimate team. I think that's probably true. But is that the thing that we should most be about? It's an open question. But my leaning is to say no. I think that most of us are on other teams that are more local, that are more and so on.
And we'll have some time together as a national team. Hopefully everybody can make it for the first night at staff conference. So that'll be the next time that we can get together, not just at the meetings in February.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's nice. And some of us meet at ACMI, and when we have other things that, we got our band, places like that, there are other things that come up. All right. Well, we're taking notes, and we'll reflect on these things too. I want to honor things. I do appreciate Heidi's concern about our worship time and close suggestion of a concert of prayer. Can I hear a little bit about? This is hard because who wants less worship? I'm not. We're not trying to say that, but do you think we ought to? There is a little bit of a practical issue that we're not sure that we can get music, like instruments, and you can't carry a keyboard on an airplane. We could rent locally. It does get both expensive and just it's hard to make all the arrangements, get the speakers and all the things that you need to do just to get musical support. It doesn't mean we can't worship without it, but we're facing the same thing in our reentry conference in a couple of weeks. So what are the feelings about our worship and concert prayer time around this? Okay, Katie, go ahead. We got to unmute you. Hang on just a minute, Katie. Okay, go ahead.
I'm all for it. I believe that this whole topic of multi-ethnicity gets us into a level of spiritual warfare that because of its very nature, and worship and prayer are critical for that. So, and as far as music is concerned, that team meeting that Sharon is remembering, I remember I led a session and I had JoVen led it, and she just used an iPod. And that was fine. Getting some music that way.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
I guess one of my questions would be, what is the worship going to be like? Because is it just going to, I shouldn't say just, is it going to be us standing looking at a screen and singing some songs, or is there going to be different ways of doing worship or things like that? It just, I enjoy singing, but I know oftentimes at some of these meetings where we've done some worship, it's felt more like a token. We have to do some worship because we're a Christian group that's meeting together as a team, and so we need to sing 2 songs, versus like we actually think that worship is important, and so we need to make sure that we're connecting in that way with God. And so I guess there's not really a specific question out of this, just more kind of what's the plan structure, because I don't want it to feel like we're just doing it because we think we have to type of thing. It should be something that actually is, connecting.
How about 3 songs? Sorry. Yeah.
And are they going to be multi-ethnic? It's the other thing, because
Sure.
that would make sense given our theme.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Well, I take it the silence from them would suggest that whatever felt that was said is what you felt needed to be said, and we'll take that under counsel for revising the schedule accordingly. As far as the some of the sessions that are on here, do you have comments about those?
And keeping my theme of being the guy who says, "What the heck's going on?" I just want to say I do like the headings, but I could use like a comment added to that document that says continuing overview. This is referring to, because I don't know that. So
Right.
I have trust in Katie, but I'm curious as to what that is, or communication or identity, all those different sessions.
Yeah.
So I need that before I could comment on just the word there.
Yeah. I know that you're not going to be able to comment on the details of the things because you don't exactly know what they are. Part of that is that I just don't have stuff from Paul, so I don't want to sort of bait and switch people in terms of saying that it's going to be about this, and then Paul has another idea. But for what it's worth, just real briefly, Darren, the continuum is the explication of a paper that Joe Ho wrote around 5. The continuum is that we have spectrums of things like task and relationship that people land in different places. They land there because of temperament, and they land in different places across the continuum because of culture. Because cultures just emphasize some things more than others do. And so those 5 areas, 2 of them are direct and indirect communication and self, identity from self or from community. So what happens is that there's some instruction on that and sort of what does that look like, and then typically what we've done is do some kind of exercise that helps us understand about where we fall on that continuum, and then have conversation about what the implications are in leadership settings and so forth. One of the things that we've done and will probably do, although again, I can't say because Paul hasn't told me yet, but is that we got everybody who was together to sort of put themselves on the spectrum where they self-identified on these five continua that are in the paper that Katie's helping us with. And it's interesting to sort of see how we line up physically on a spectrum that's actually masking taped onto the floor. So you kind of line up, where on that spectrum you are. And then we talk about where we think maybe ISM is, like where on the task relationship thing would ISM land, do you think? And we do that. And then we might say, where in InterVarsity do we think it lands? It's just a way to help us understand and get after what the landscape is. And then you do it with the second one, then the third, the fourth, and the fifth. And it's just interesting how people mix, and you can sort of ask, like, what is the deal with you on this one end, and what is the deal with you, like, why are you self-identifying there, and so on. So it's a way to stimulate conversation. And then the other two sessions I just said are what they, we have some instruction, we do some interaction to help us, and then talk about implications and application for it. I know that's still not very helpful, Darren, but it's at least the broad sense of what those sessions are. In other words, I think really what I'm asking is not comments on individual sessions, but do you think that structuring it like this with sort of problem identification on the first day, whatever that looks like, and how we tweak it with the other things we've been talking about, and having some training on the second day, that's sort of, it needs to have dotted, real connections with what we've done the previous day, but it doesn't, as I said earlier, we're not solving what we identify on the first day. We're trying to go after a couple of things that will help our cultural quotient go up. And understanding these things, and the kind of things that our learning and talent people have wanted everybody in the movement to go through, as saying these are part of cross-cultural competency.
I just have a question. And again, one thing that sits very heavy with me is that after the last meeting, we had a few voices, especially from our non-white staff on the ISM national team, that said they were okay meetings, but they weren't great meetings. And I think there were there was just, I don't know, Eva, maybe you should talk to this, even though, of course, you can't speak for all minorities in the world. I don't want to put that on you. But I'm just, are these meetings going to feel better, not for all minorities, but for the ones we have on the team? How can we make sure that these team meetings are a better experience, or the best possible experience for Jobin and Sarah and Eva, and if I leave Steve, and again, not that they speak for all minorities, or that they, are speaking for all Africans or all Asian Americans or whatever, but just those are 4 people we have on the team, and I know that's on your heart, Mark. I know that's the kind of leader you are. So maybe run it by them. And is there space? Because I know that these folks, just like we, all had painful experiences within InterVarsity. And some of their painful experiences may be due to being a minority. And can we invite them, not force them, but can we invite them to trust us with that and share that with us? Because that's where I learned. I think of an experience I had with a couple of African-American staff at Tri-C this past semester, and just listening to their stories, I learned tons and tons of things by just sitting and listening to their pain and experiences, where, intellectually I knew all those things, but it became real by hearing their experiences. So that's just a thought. So on the second day, is there space to, just be vulnerable and be open and sit with our brothers and sisters? And maybe what it takes there is to pray, maybe it's to be silent, but to just listen and say, there is a space for you in our team. And because there's a space for you on our team, even though we don't have the solution, we believe there's a space for you in InterVarsity. That's just a thought.
Yeah, I like that. That's helpful, Heidi. Thank you. I really appreciate your articulating that. I'm sorry. Is that Eva I've heard, and maybe somebody else?
Go ahead first.
Oh, I was just going to say thanks, Heidi, for what you shared. I think the word space keeps coming up in our discussion, and I feel like part of the challenge, I think, is we have to work with certain times constraints, but it's like everything's really packed and structured, and sometimes like stories sharing or just getting to know each other and, discussing something so tough, I wonder if we are going to have the freedom to like kind of be flexible in the moment, to let things go longer, certain parts go longer, or certain parts. And I think a lot of conversations are going to happen outside of the structure times too, where people will be debriefing and chatting about things that have come up, late at just create space for that, maybe. Not sure how, but
Well, I mean, we could jettison one of the sessions and just say, it's discussion. I'd need help on that. I'm trying to help understand how that you provide enough space for people in ways that address those who need more structure to be able to share versus those who just want to have a freewheeling, or even like, let's just give more off time. We could say that. We could take all the time off the second or the first afternoon, eliminate the ISM and diversity session, and just say this is off and connect with people if we thought that was the way to create space.
I think sometimes that doesn't, it's like some of that can't even be planned ahead of time, because I'll just have to just go with how things go the first night. And so I don't know. I think it's going to go right. You don't even have Paul sessions. I don't know exactly what he's going to talk about, so there's a lot of unknowns right now too.
Fair enough. Okay. Other thoughts? Darren, were you starting? Somebody else is starting to talk too.
Yeah, I went to Bosnia with with training and prep for thinking multi-ethnically a little bit more, and thinking about continuum, thinking about communication, direct and indirect, and awareness that different cultures did that differently. And it was kind of like my first couple of years there were dealing with some of the parts, but lacking like a greater paradigm for missiology and contextualization, because no one had ever given me the teaching or brought me to a conversation about that big thing. And when I went to Fuller and started studying missiology, that was like the hugest aha of our last 8 years, was learning the paradigm of this is what it looks like to plant the gospel in people of different cultures in a way that will grow in that culture's style, and that they will ultimately identify as being Saudi or Chinese or whatever for Jesus. Not, I came and learned a foreign idea, foreign to my culture and background, called Christianity. And some places it meant, some places didn't. That's what shifted so much of our last couple of years ministry. And as I come back and think on ISM, I wonder if that isn't a piece that's missing. We deal with the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to ourselves be on our journey multi-ethnically, and how to try to welcome people onto our chapter, our style, our plant, knowing that they are different, but we don't really know the missiological framework, the contextualization framework for how to plant things that will go back to their own countries. And maybe we can kind of get a pass on that, like in domestic IV, non-ISM, but we're dealing with people that are from other cultures and mostly going back to those. And so I just wonder if there isn't a session or a conversation there. I mean, this is the national team on teaching missiology and contextualization, which I think, for me, it was very much the structure within that surrounds and within which these other pieces fall.
That kind of overarching thing, I think, is important. The thing that occurs to me is this the place for it, to give enough space to be able to do that well, and I would take it under advisement for sure, Darren. It's good.
I think that'd be a great kind of thing for the staff conference the following.
Yeah.
Well, I admit that. I just say, if this is the national team that will shape the staff conference, if we don't have the paradigm, the framework now, will we add it in later for those that we're going to teach it to or something?
Well, I think it's a matter of sort of prioritization. Is it essential to have that it's essential to have it, but is it essential prior to the kinds of things that we're talking about here? It may be, but it seems like it moves into some areas of like understanding basically how culture operates. What's the distinction, the relationship between gospel and culture? Not easy to really get at that in an hour-long session or something in ways that will frame the larger conversation. I mean, again, I think it has merit as an idea. It would supplant other things that we're doing here for sure. And if it's needed, we should. If it's just something that also is part of a larger conversation, then maybe we can do it in a different venue. We need to wrap this part of the conversation up. Is any other things that people are keen on saying before we move on?
Just a thought, and you can discard it if you like, but I was wondering, so when I saw the direct indirect session, I was like, yeah, okay. And I'm sure we can do that in great depth, but I was wondering, is that really, it is on the continuum, I understand that, but is that really the thing that trips us up? Or in ISM, and if we think about that, could we maybe do a session on what kind of culture we have in InterVarsity as large? So if we think about cultures, InterVarsity has a culture. And ISM maybe has the same or different culture within InterVarsity. That to me would really be helpful to think through as a community, to say, how do we view culture within InterVarsity? Because that's where we operate. We don't just serve our international students. We're not field staff, but the people you have at the national team meeting, largely now we have shifted our ministry to serve people within InterVarsity. That's just a thought.
Yeah, I think it's a useful thing. I'm hopeful that we can get some of that in the cultural continuum stuff and placing ourselves along the masking tape, that we at least have a bit of a conversation about how InterVarsity as a culture is along these direct, indirect, emotionally expressive, emotionally restrained kind of continua. But I think that's the milieu we operate in, is our wider movement. So it's helpful. Katie, did you want to say something? Hang on just a second. Let me unmute you. Go ahead, Katie.
I've seen the continue. I've already looked at it because you emailed it to me. And Heidi, that is definitely a part of the way that Joho has the whole thing structured, is that we consider where is InterVarsity on all of these different ones. But the other thing on the whole communication issue is, I hope Paul is going to address, I don't know how to exactly describe this, but discourse. And in other words, some people jump in automatically and other people needed to be invited into a conversation. And I think that's a critical thing that we often miss, even though we do training on direct and indirect.
Yeah.
So the issue of knowing who to invite in and when to invite in is something I'm hoping Paul Takanaga will address.
Yeah, and then, just the whole issue of invitation to gift sharing, to a new leadership position, invitation versus self-assertion is a significant.
Exactly. And the other thing I was going to say about contextualization, jumping off what Darren said, is that as I looked at those continuums, I couldn't help but go back to honor shame and to worldview. And there is a connection between deep worldview level and some of these other things. Not that we have to address it at this team meeting, but I agree with Darren that it certainly needs to be done at the larger team meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think we're draw us to a close. You want to make a last comment, Darren?
Yeah, is this paper something on the continuum that you could send us?
Sure. Okay, thank you all very much. So helpful input. Good to hear from you. I do think, coming out of this, I will get the sessions from Paul, and he and I will talk about them. And it's helpful to me in my conversation with Paul to have this conversation first, actually, to give shape to that. I also want to take into account and revise the schedule according to some of the things that you've said, to allow for maybe a few different things, and spell out a little bit more what the sessions would be. And then I also thirdly want to run it by the rest of the team, especially I think minority friends, as but to say, it's just kind of the shape of a meeting that feels, and honestly, as we've all articulated our own preferences here, I'm sure that those preferences will be articulated there too, and then it becomes a matter of trying to address how you actually decide what you're going to do or set it up. So I'll do that. I probably won't get something back to you until after the first of the year at this point, unless it seems like Paul wants to have better feedback sooner. But just the realities of timing are probably not going to allow that. Does that sound okay as a way forward then? Are we okay? All right. Good. Thank you again. Should somebody like to pray for us to close that time?
I can pray.
Oh, thank you, Eva. Go ahead, please.
Father God, thank you so much for cultures and our own stories, really, that you've written in all the various experiences we've had. God, I just pray that you give us amazing wisdom and give Mark and Paul insight as they continue planning these meetings, that they would really achieve their goal, and that you'd be preparing our hearts for those conversations even now, that it would be a fruitful time, and that that what you want to see accomplished would be accomplished. In your precious name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Eva. Appreciate it. Okay. Anybody need to take a stretch break?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a few minutes, come back, as soon as you stretch.